Okay, everyone, good morning. Whilst we sort I love technology, but yeah, there's a rather complicated camera system which is great, and it will produce a much better result in terms of our broadcast efforts. But it is complicated in that it has about 5 or 6 settings, and I've already managed accidentally on the trials before we set it out to set the settings so that I was almost kind of getting an over anxious view of my nostrils, which is kind of not, if I may say, particularly helpful. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the start of the main conference. I hope those of you who came for the evening event last night enjoyed that. I thought it was a great way to start. And what we've got today are a series of presentations around the theme of the conference. We're focusing on the use of evidence in order to assist, support, and make reform in policing. And you'll see presentations both from external speakers and from the staff and students in this program. We'll have the say the roving mic. We'll have the moving mic. And just remember, folks, Jacob learned, you kind of duck when the thing's moving around. Okay, but we will do that. We'll try and make sure we've always got time for questions, but it won't always be possible, in the sense we quite deliberately try to put quite a lot of material in the program. So they're short, they're sharp. And if you are going to ask questions, can I please ask you to make them a question and not a several paragraph long statement, please? Okay, so a question, not a long statement, because when the rest of us need to have time to absorb it as well. So please, if I could. Okay, and without further ado, our first speaker is Professor Jason Roach from the University of Huddersfield. He's published a very neat and very helpful book on policing and psychology in the last 12 months. And he's going to pick out one of the issues out of that book, which I found a really good guide to that interaction between psychology and policing. So without further ado, Jason, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Yes, I am Jason Roach, or if you're Jerry, I'm not. I'm Reducing Crime podcast number 44. Okay, got the plug in straight away. And thank you for the plug for the book. I'm going to build up to that you've done. Okay, I was talking to my daughter a little while ago, and she said, well, I talk to her regularly, but this was particularly about an hour ago. And she said, "Where are you then, Dad?" So I said, "Well, I told you I'm going to the University of Cambridge." And she said, "Oh dear, aren't they all clever there?" So when I had taken the knife out of my heart, I thought she's got a point here. So I think I do have a little bit of imposter syndrome. So if you see me at break time or at lunchtime walking around with a tray, please just humour me and take whatever it is that's on it and eat it or something, please. Okay, I'm probably the curveball, because I'm not going to present any fantastic projects. I'm going to try and sell a few ideas to you. Okay. I realise my terms of reference need a bit of an update, because there's probably many people in the room who don't remember or even know that The Good, the Bad and the Ugly was a film that existed in the 1970s. Yeah, I do apologise. Obviously, in the room even remembers the soundtrack. Okay, so I'm going to refer to that, but what I'm using is I've borrowed is kind of a phrase, really, and I'm going to talk about decision making. I'm going to talk about decision making in a crime preventive context, and I'm going to talk about decision making in a criminal investigation context. Okay, and I want to leave you with a couple of ideas at the end, particularly those of you that are in the first year of this master's that are thinking about projects. I'm trying to sell you some ideas that you might use in order to advance them as projects. And there's Clint Eastwood, who was in the film, for those that do remember it. And so I'm going to change it, though, because I don't want to leave on a downer. So I'm going to change it to the ugly, the bad and the good. We're going to end with the good. Okay, and I'm going to briefly talk about the ugly and sort of teeter with the bad, but I'm going to focus on the good, because I think that's much better message to send out there. I'm going to try and foster a general appreciation of how influence is important, I should say, in decision making. Okay. This is born out of a lot of the things that I actually got around to writing the book that Peter was referring to, called Practical Psychology for Policing, by the way, available at all reputable and disreputable retailers. During COVID, I had nothing else to do, no excuse not to write it. But one of the books that fell off my when I was sort of walking around my room in which I write, fell off the bookcase was Gross's 1992 book Psychology, which I had in 1992 doing a psychology degree. And it opened on a section on influence. And I'm thinking, well, I don't subscribe necessarily to all the best research is the most recent. It's often just the latest. Yeah. There are some classics that endure. And when you've been around long enough, as some of us are, you kind of cling to those classics and you think, hang on a minute, they're still relevant now. So the psychology of influence stuff that I'm going to get to is incredibly important. I still think, and I don't think police officers get to taught any of that, or criminologists, or even psychologists. I mean, I don't know how much psychology is left in the psychology degree now. I haven't taught one for a long while. So I'm going back to basics, and I'm going to sort of demonstrate how important influence is to the SARA process, so the problem-solving process, particularly with regards to the response bit. Okay, now I spend a lot of time with police officers, and anyone who's spent a lot of time with academics will know why. I spend a lot of time with police officers, and the response side of it, often they do brilliant scanning. So they identify the problem, that there is a problem in the first place, and then they do a brilliant analysis, or someone does it for them, but they've got this brilliant understanding of this problem. And then the response bit, they do what they would have done had they not done the scanning and analysis first, which is a bit of a waste, isn't it? So I'm speaking to those people who come up with some ideas, because there's a famous saying, there's a famous quote from the US Patent Office in 1920 that all that can be invented has been invented, which is clearly wrong. Yeah. I'm going to extrapolate that to evidence-based policing. We don't know everything that works in evidence-based policing. We know that we can use quite a lot of it, but we need ideas and we need to test ideas. And I'm trying to foster people's confidence in coming up with ideas and testing them. Okay, so that's what I'm going to try and do today. So influence is everywhere. My little fish there at some point is going to turn around, unless he's a complete narcissist, which I don't think he is. So influence is everywhere. There's good influences, although this might be subjective, towards pro-social behaviour, and I'll sort of lean or nod towards the nudge kind of approach a bit later, particularly for encourage people to eat more healthily and drink less, etc., etc. So the pro-social stuff. There's the bad, okay, which is replete in the criminal investigation, investigative decision-making literature about kind of cognitive bias, and I'm going to scoot through some of them because many of them you all know, and then I'm going to try and turn it on its head and say, if we understand bias and we understand how it works, not only can we help police officers or people making decisions in a criminal context to make better ones or enhance their decision making, but we can use it against those that aren't doing good in society. Okay, so we can use it to prevent crime. We can put people off by using what we know about influence. Two classics there, heavyweights, Zimbardo and Milgram, of course, associated with the halcyon days of psychological research before ethics was invented. Oh, I'm more knows, where you could literally pretend to wire someone up to the mains and see how they reacted. The fun's gone out of it now, hasn't it? Really has. But they were talking about, they were looking at persuasion, so deference to authority, obedience, those kind of things. Persuasion is the sinister end of what I'm going to talk about. It's the extreme end of influence. It's getting people to think and do things that they don't necessarily want to do. Advertisers, I always thought police forces should employ advertisers because they're the dark side of psychology. They can sell you all sorts of things. And I'll come back to that at the end, trying to put myself out of a job there. But I'm going to talk about a broader kind of umbrella of influence. I'm going to talk about other things that I think have been lost from the psychological literature and research that could be imported into crime prevention and into police decision making. I'm going to start right at the beginning, and that is we all have the same equipment. Okay. We've all evolved in the same way, and we all have the same equipment. And those dudes there, at some point, they're going to realize that they ain't going to get home because they've box themselves in quite on. And my point there is that we all make ridiculous sort of mistakes, often because we're not thinking things to the nth degree that we should do, and we're just kind of acting on what's known as, I'll come to it, system one thinking. My best, yesterday, I decided, I was on the train all day coming down from Leeds, and I decided to walk from Cambridge Station to Selwyn College, and I looked on my app on my phone, which took me about half an hour to find it, but there you go. There's a new phone, and I'm old. And I found it, and it said it was a 15-minute walk. Okay, so I thought, well, I'll set up, not a problem. 15 minutes later, it still says 15 minutes. I'm thinking, have I not got a signal? What is going on here? And then it turned out it was on car journey mode. 35, 40 minutes later, I arrived looking like wet through from quite a hot day carrying stuff. So, you know, I'm supposedly vaguely intelligent and have a PhD, but I can make stupid decisions and I can make erroneous. We all do. Yeah. And we have to accept that pragmatically. And those of you that know anything about decision making, and particularly research, will know that the gods of decision making research in psychology are Kahneman and Tversky. And their very basic model, which is absolutely wonderful, is the system 1, system 2 thinking model. So system 1 is where you react to things, you instinctively react to things, you don't think about them. I once did a study with some cops in Blackpool. There was a taxi rank in Blackpool that was particularly let's say there was a lot of aggro. That just translates as trouble to anyone not from over here. Aggro on a Friday night, and I went and I watched, and there was quite a lot of aggro and to and fro, and people jumping into taxis that, you know, shouldn't be getting into one because they were way back, you know, people were waiting for them. So I suggested that a police officer get the traffic cone out of his car and put it actually where the taxi rack should be. We went back an hour later and people were queuing behind that cone, that little environmental change, because they hadn't thought about it, but that's what we're British. And it works in Britain, by the way, when there are people that queue. Anyone that's ever been trying to get on a bus in Spain will know that it's a free-for-all. But here it worked. Crime prevention only in Britain. And simple things like that just happen. Yeah, we just instinctively react to them. And I'm going to talk a lot of the influence we're talking about today will be at that level before people have actually sat there and rationally thought about it. We do have system 2 thinking. Evolution's been kind. We can override our initial thoughts and our initial sort of drive to act in a certain way, fight or flight, if you like, and we can think about it. The problem is there's not enough hours in a day for us to employ system 2 all the time. We have to rely on our instincts, which 9 times out of 10 are probably okay, but that 1 time out of 10 may be catastrophic. Mainly as well because those of you with a psychology degree, forgive me, but perception is not unbiased. We perceive things through a filter. It's who we are. If we're religious, we perceive the world around us and everything in it through quite a religious lens. Yeah, it affects what we are interested in and how we perceive things. And attention is the same. Okay, we attend to things that we're interested in. I got a C at O level in maths. People remember O levels? But a C, I scraped it, and it wasn't. I don't think that I couldn't do it. It's just I wasn't interested in it, and it didn't go in. Yeah, so we attend to things we're most interested in. Therefore, you know, I'm quite good at pub quizzes because I've got an attention for trivia and not necessarily for useful information, which will become apparent by the end of about 10 o'clock today. And so, you know, there is a bias, an inherent bias that we all have, and that is what we attend to. And mindsets. Everyone remember the investigative mindset? Well, College of Policing, I was on some panel, College of Policing recently about the investigative mindset, because no one knew what the hell it was or what it is or what it should be. So I put my hand up and said, I think we should change it because mindsets are fixed. It means that someone's not being kind of flexible in their decision making in an investigation. It means they've literally blinkered. Well, that went down well for about 1 nanosecond, and then they moved on, and it's still called the investigative mindset. My illustration is that mindsets are quite fixed. Once we get into one, as I will become apparent in a minute, it's really hard to shift, and they're biased. Okay. Remembering as well, whatever you remember is biased as well. Yeah, usually rose-tinted glasses effect. We remember the good things, unless, of course, it's something horrific and it's a trauma, and kind of we can't unremember it. It's constantly come. And I'll put a plug in for Jess Miller's book if you want to know about trauma and resilience, and you can pay me afterwards. Okay. Belief perseverance is another interesting one. Is that we tend to believe things to the nth degree, and that kind of ties in with confirmation bias, or if you're American, verification bias as well. So we attend to evidence that supports our hypothesis and not that confutes it. Memories are just like that as well. Really hard to shift the memory, yeah, or your interpretation of that memory. And I always have a dig at the murder investigation manual, which is kind of out of date now, but all it ever says for police officers to do is investigators must remain impartial and open-minded, which is easily said and incredibly difficult to do. So I petitioned for years about a little bit more information about actually what they're trying to be, you know, how to be impartial, etc. We're all lazy as well. Some of us more than others, but we're all lazy in our decision making. We can use that to our advantage if we're trying to influence people who would offend, perhaps. We know that they're not going to think to the nth degree. Most of them aren't. Not most of them that sitting in the prisons aren't. They're going to act very quickly and their decision making is going to be very quick, but we're all like that. Okay, but we can override it. Here's my ugly case, if you like. I could have picked a few, but it's always from the sort of the miscarriages of justice end of criminal investigations. That's Stefan Kishko. Do you remember? Served 16 years in prison for the murder of a 10-year and for the rape and murder in 1975 of a 10-year-old schoolgirl called Leslie Mulsey. Yeah, read the inquiry, the review of that, if you're interested in this kind of thing, of that case and that court case, which was even worse than the criminal investigation, and you will see that it was glaringly obvious this man couldn't and didn't do it. Okay, but what happened was, as Pease and Stelfox and Pease point out in many kind of miscarriages of justice in the criminal investigations, is that the investigating officers or those leading the investigation jumped too quickly from identifying a suspect to building a case against them. In Stefan Kishko's case, he was, in quotes, the local weirdo. He fitted the bill. Yeah. He served 16 years in prison. He died within a year of being released. Tragic thing that should never happen. The reason I'm using it as an example is the bias in that was incredible. It was just disgusting bias in that investigation. Also, there's something called the representative heuristic as well, where we take, we put our brains automatically pick categories. So who would have thought that doctors are, well, they're wonderful people, aren't they? Striking at the moment, the so-and-sos, but they're wonderful people who try to keep us alive. They don't kill us, do they? You know, they do good. Well, that's exactly what the junior investigator, scientist sort of look into the rumours and worries about Harold Shipman thought as well, which is why the actual investigation was delayed, proper investigation, by about 6 months. And those of you not familiar with Jimmy Savile, okay, over here, he wore gold lame tracksuits, ran marathons for charity, and had a program on which I actually sent in and asked. It's called Jim Will Fix It, yeah, where young people's dreams got made true. I wrote in, I can't even remember what it was I asked for, but God, I'm glad I didn't get through. He was exposed is probably the wrong word. He was exposed after he died for being a prolific paedophile, predatory paedophile. Okay, but nobody would have believed it, and people would cry. He was from Leeds. He was buried in Leeds. He was laid to rest in Leeds. Well, he was laid out in state in Leeds. And I remember going through Leeds at the time, and people were queuing around the whole city to pay their respects to this man, because the charade, the veneer, he was a wonderful person, but he wasn't. We took him as being representative of a nice person, a charitable person, and he clearly wasn't. Common attribution error is another favourite that I plucked out of the depths of psychological kind of knowledge, if you like, and that is where we attribute different causes or different explanations for other people's behaviour as we attribute to ours. Okay, so if you think about it in court, we've got the defence, and they're trying to portray the defendant as, external causes, really, or correlates at least, that were, that led him to commit the crime that he committed. So maybe, I don't know, poor parenting, whatever that is. Someone explain that to me. I don't know what good parenting is. Or brought up in an aggressive household, whatever it was. They're trying to externalize the reason for why this person committed this crime. Yeah. And the prosecution are trying to do exactly the opposite. They're trying to internalize it and say, no, he's a bad and he's done this before, etc. And he's going to do it again. It's got nothing to do with any of these external circumstances. Many years ago, I half trained as a clinical psychologist. Okay, and I'm not proud of this. I gave it up because I got flaming fed up with listening to people's problems. Not once did anyone say, how are you feeling today, Jason? Talk about person-centered. The whole thing was, but I sat in on a group, and one of them, a group of sex offenders. There was about 10 men, and I sat in and I listened to them, and they didn't say anything until one of them said, I know we've all done the same thing, yeah, but it wasn't my fault, yeah. And all the others thought, hang on a minute, it wasn't my fault either. And it had a negative effect. So there's like this collective kind of culpability or unculpability. And that was because they were attributing the blame to other people. Society's fault, apparently. Romans and Greeks used to sleep with young boys, and that wasn't a problem. It's society's problem. I mean, now it doesn't get much more abhorrent than that, does it? But that's the best example I can give you of attributing Where am I going with this? Well, it is in a police context, because if you have, not necessarily that one, but if you have this bias in your head, and I'll give you some examples in a minute, that it is going to affect your decision making unless you rein it in. Okay. Now, there is a caveat to anyone that's doing anything in the decision making world, psychology of decision making, and particularly in an investigative or a criminal in a policing context. And that's, remember that hindsight bias is the only exact science. I wish that with these great inquiries, they would get someone from another planet to actually lead them who doesn't know the outcome. Yeah, because the Grenfell Tower, it was a wonderful piece of work, but everybody knew the outcome. And again, with policing sort of inquiries, that seem to have been referred to the inspectorate, whatever it is, then perhaps somebody who doesn't know what happened should be doing it. Bad decisions not always appear to be so at the time. Remember John Humble, who was exposed as the Yorkshire Ripper hoaxer in 2006. He was the one who sent tapes and letters to the Ripper inquiry, who was so desperate at that time to try and get a result. They'd been looking for him for 3 or 4 years by then. The Ripper, that they believed it, and they moved the whole investigation over to Sunderland. Meanwhile, Peter Sutcliffe killed another 3 women in Yorkshire in the Great Manchester area. So, catastrophic kind of decision making. Good decisions can be associated with bad outcomes as well. You could make some really good decisions. I spent a few years ago, probably about 10 years ago, I can come up with something called long interval detections, and these are cold cases, that are resolved by a DNA hit. Okay, so you get, particularly if it was, for example, DNA extracted from the sperm heads of a young girls who've been sexually assaulted and murdered underwear, that's pretty damning that it's that person. Yeah, and invariably it was 20, 30 years before the person, the offender is dead. Okay, so what I did was I got Lancashire Police to let me look at some cases, and I looked backwards from the point of identifying him back through the investigations, not to point the finger at anybody. Yeah, just to see about the decision making and what went wrong. And the decision making in those investigations, and indeed in some of those reviews, was fantastic. There was nothing wrong with it. They didn't identify the person because the context was totally different. It didn't have CCTV all over the place. It didn't have cell phone analysis. They didn't have DNA at the time. Yeah, but the decisions they made were were great. They were good decisions, but it didn't produce a good outcome. Yeah, and I think we need to remember that. And bad decisions, whatever that is, bad decisions might be hidden in a good outcome. You might get lucky. So you might have a good outcome in an investigation, for example, because of luck, not because of a correct hypothesis or whatever it is. And the media, I'm going to bang at the media as well, okay? And the media, in terms of policing and decision making, only focus on that they consider to have been a bad decision. Never good. The case of Nicola Bulley, for example, tragic case of a young woman who we believe fell into a river in Lancashire and died. Yeah, the police maintained all the way through that she'd fallen into the river and her body would be recovered. And all sorts of experts, after a week or two, whatever it was, decided that that was probably the wrong decision to make. She wasn't in there; something else had happened. Yeah. All sorts of armchair detectives were coming up with their stupid theories on social media about what really happened. In fact, her husband was accused at one point of actually, murdering her. Awful thing. Well, the body was recovered. The police were right. That was a great decision. Yeah, it took some time, but she was recovered from the water. Not one media report said, well done, police. That was a great decision. They moved on to the next bad decision in another case that they anticipated. So, I'm sorry, but, good decision making just ain't fashionable. People just don't want to know about it. They want to know about the bad stuff. But we need to look at cases where good decisions were made to learn from them, not just from bad. Yeah. Here's a quick piece of research that Ken and I did. It's a bit of a clumsy bit of research that Ken Pease and I did in 2012. And it involved photoshopping a police car in front of different types of building and giving it was a questionnaire. Getting the respondents, members of the public, to pick what they thought was the most likely reason why that police car was there. Yeah, and you can imagine, it's not kind of Sherlock Holmes territory, but you can imagine that for the Tower Block, the police car was there. Mainly people thought because they were there to arrest someone. There was a drugs raid or whatever. There was a conflictual kind of, context in terms of why the police were there. And in a lovely mansion there, that was there because they'd been burgled. The police were providing a service. Yeah. Well, why? Why? Well, domestic violence, for example, or domestic abuse goes on in any house. It's not a class thing. Yeah. So why? So going to do this with some police officers just to see, because if you're called out for service and you're going to an area that you know is notoriously bad for whatever you've already kind of made your mind up what's going on, haven't you? Unless you kind of, you think about it and you, what does it say? Keep an open mind. Okay, the worst kinds of bias, okay, and we know that the reporting and the charging and the prosecution of rape and other sexual assault is not even the tip of the iceberg. Yeah, and we know that the research shows in the decision making and the bias that we know that there are rape myths out there that people subscribe to and some police adhere to. Yeah, hopefully this has changed, over the last 10 years, but traditionally no. So there's been 4 types of rape myths that have been found. So those that imply only certain types of women get raped. How abhorrent is that? Yeah. Those that blame the victims for their rape. Those that exonerate the perpetrators. I'm not even going to go there. I'm not going to try and give an example for that one. And those that express disbelief in claims of rape at all. Okay. We know about these. We know that this is probably unconscious bias. If it's not, then they shouldn't be a police officer taking it anywhere near the public. Because policing is what, 99% communication. And for effective communication, you've got to be as unbiased as you possibly can. There's also, on the other side of it, the stereotypes of survivors. Okay, so the lack of a prior victim-offender relationship. So the evidence suggests that if it's a stranger-on-stranger rape, then that victim is more likely to be believed. The presence of a weapon as well, the presence of illustrative injuries and the location of victimization. I go back to my previous piece of research with the slides there, yeah, and the nice house and the not so nice tower block. We ask members of the public where they think a rape or a sexual assault might happen. I think they pick the tower block or the lift in the tower block or the lobby in the tower block or something like that. So what does that equate to? It's those victims and survivors whose assaults fit with stereotypical elements closer to real rape myths who are most likely to come forward and report it. So there's a two-way bias here. Police officers, whoever it is, may be biased in their handling of the report, and the victim may not actually report it because they don't think they fit the stereotype that will get them heard, which is, I'm just throwing that in there. You can see a little bit of a soapbox moment for me. Some other common kind of heuristics. I'm going to talk about some other bias, and then I'll get on to some kind of how we can use some of this. Is where we start off, influence is where we end up. There's a famous case in America, JonBenet Ramsey. She was a 10-year-old girl, and she was raped. And sorry, I'm getting a bit down. I'll lift up the mood a bit later. I'll tell a joke or do some shadow puppetry or something. She was brutally murdered in the basement of her own house. And the reason for the story is the first police officers on the scene and knew the family, a very kind of community orientated, well known in the family, decided immediately, subconsciously, the family couldn't be involved whatsoever. Yeah, so they didn't have them as suspects. I'm not saying they did do it, but they haven't got anyone for that murder. But they discounted them too soon. And you can't go back 3 weeks later. The forensics aren't going to be the same. They would have corroborated their stories if they did do it. So where you start from can affect where you end up. And television, you all know about that. And satisficing heuristic, this used to happen. I saw this happen on the Sweeney once. Remember the Sweeney? No, okay. Pop show. Yeah. Yeah, watch it. It's fantastic. Life on Mars was kind of like the modern day Sweeney. And I saw this happen, and they Regan and Carter had a list of suspects, and they had a prime suspect, suspect A, and then they had suspect B, and then suspect C. But suspect A had an alibi, which was really annoyed them. Yeah, because they were convinced they didn't fit him up for once. It was suspect A had an alibi. So they went for suspect B. But that's called the satisficing heuristic. Why? Because by the premise by which A was the top suspect is clearly wrong, you need to go back and work out kind of, not just take the next suspect. And we do that all the time. We take the next option because we think that's the best one. It's not always. And I'm going to have a little go at forensic science here. So we hold forensic science in great esteem, particularly DNA samples. Yeah, and DNA is the gold standard. If RCTs are the gold standard of evidence, DNA is platinum, whatever it is, yeah? Although they don't infer guilt, they just tell you that someone was somewhere likely to have been at some point, yeah? Wonderful, I refer to a wonderful work by Etienne Drawer at UCL, who sent some samples. He did it with fingerprints first, but then with DNA. He sent some samples of DNA off to some DNA experts and said, can you make any matches? About 12 of them it was. And they came back with a few matches. He then sent the same experts the same DNA sample 6 months later and said, the police have got suspects for these. Can you make any matches? And they made double the number of matches with the same. So even though the science and the process seems infallible, when a human being is involved in it, there is room for bias. Yeah. That should make the rest of us feel a little bit better. We're also rubbish at identifying people's emotions and all the classic stuff about gaze avoidance or that in interviews. We all know that's probably someone's anxious. That's the first time that they've ever been in a police station, let alone an interview room, and they're scared. That's not about being guilty. So we're quite rubbish. So that's trash for any American people. We're quite rubbish at people's emotions and reading people's emotions, even though we don't think we are. Okay, and those are some of the classic kind of signs. I did have one with loads of emojis on it, but I've dropped that one because emojis they're fixed like a mindset, aren't they? The emojis don't change their people do change their expressions. And the result, some of the research or some of the research that's been looked into this actually says that we're actually better at reading people's emotions if we don't look at them, if we just listen to them. It's a radical idea. So we've got all this video stuff in interview scenarios now, and we can watch people. Well, actually, it might have been better when we just had the tape because the bias doesn't kick in. Okay, Making Bad. Come on, that's a 2000 and something reference. Someone must get that. The Sweeney I'll accept, but you all know about Making Bad, Breaking Bad. Yeah. What makes cognitive bias flourish? We know about that. Poor personal well-being. I do a lot of work on well-being, particularly around criminal investigators and how they deal with some of the onslaught of kind of emotion and the psychological kind of baggage that comes with investigating child homicide, for example. Yeah. And if you're not in a good place, then you're going to make bad decisions, or you're going to duck decisions, or you're not going to be. I hate the phrase optimal decision making. I have no idea what that is. Yeah. I think that's for computers or something else. But you're not going to make the best decisions. Okay. Tiredness as well. Of course, that's all part of it. I don't know what I've always wondered, this piece of research someone could do if you want. At what age is unacceptable to blame your child's behavior on them being tired? What do we reckon? Yeah. I don't think the crazed mum went into the court and said, look, Your Honour, they were really tired. But we do, don't I? He's tired or he's hungry or whatever. He's just killed 3 people. Yeah, well. Tiredness is definitely part of it, and pressure, we know, resources. It would be lovely, wouldn't it, if you've got a major investigation on your hands, on your patch, and all the burglaries on the patch. I'll tell you what, we won't do any burglaries while you're doing this investigation because you need the resources. Don't happen, does it? Yeah. Competing demands as well, and change reluctant. Police, as an institution, is as change reluctant as any other institution. I include universities in that, who are possibly more change reluctant than actual police. We don't like to change things. It's irrefutable. We need to change, and we do it really reluctantly. Okay, although Mark kind of nodded to that, and obviously isn't reluctantly and is changing things. Okay, so making good. Okay, how do we use all that, or some of that I've talked about there, for the good? How do we use it against certain people to change their thinking and their behaviours consequently, although one doesn't always follow the other? And how do we use it to make better decisions, particularly within policing? Well, the first thing that I came across when that book fell down and opened was locus of control, Rotter 1966. I mean, this is old. I wasn't born till 1969, but 1966 is quite old, but it's important. And for those of you that are running trials or doing ICTs or what have you, think about this, okay? Think about whether the people that are, if it's a treatment thing, whatever, if it could be checkpoint, whatever it is, whether the people involved in that, what degree they actually believe that whatever it is that you're doing will work. Okay. So, for example, if I've got a really strong external locus of control, that means that fate dictates what happens to me. Yeah. I don't have much say in what happens. If I live in a high crime rate area, what is the point of me spending a fortune on a burglar alarm? It ain't going to happen. It's just, it's not going to deter anyone. It's just going to happen. We need to take that. I think this is the first learning point. We need to think about that when we are trying to influence people, perhaps to be more security conscious about their possessions. If they have a blasé attitude to it, because that's what happens, then it's not going to work, and they're not going to buy into stuff. Crime prevention only works if you get people to buy into it. Yeah. So locus of control is important. And then we've got nudge. So I'll kind of nod to nudge, and you're all familiar with nudge. It's kind of, but it's still quite rare that is as an importation into crime prevention. Even though it's been used in social policy, as I said, make people eat better and stop smoking and give up your organs when you're dead, all those kind of things. It's still not used that much. There's a behavioural insights team that kind of do stuff, but it's tangential to them, crime, really. I mean, it's become a part of their business, but they're more kind of social policy people. So nudging is in a nutshell, is you're encouraging people to make a decision they should have or would have got to anyway. You're just tipping the balance a little. So you're adding a ball to one side and just tipping the decision making. It doesn't work with those that are of a prolific stroke ingrained in a criminal career. They nudge, they need a shove, metaphorically or otherwise, they need a shove. We're talking about people that are on the cusp of changing their ways. And we do know that most young men will grow out of crime for some reason at about 20, 22, something like that, yeah? So how can we encourage people like that to actually bring it forward a bit and perhaps give up crime at 18 or not start at all? Okay, and someone asked me about situational crime prevention. This is a big thing me and Jerry kind of sign up to, situational crime prevention. It's about modifying environments to reduce opportunities for crime. It's got nothing to do with the offender. It's about opportunities for crime that we could all have. So if I've got, here's an example here. If I've got I'm a park keeper. Do they have such things? I work in a park. I'm a I can mow the lawn. I have a beautiful lawn in the park, okay? And I'm getting fed up with people walking across it. So I put up a sign which says keep off the grass. It's nothing to do with illegal substances, actual grass. Keep off the grass. Just to clarify, it wasn't, I'm not preaching to anyone here. Keep off the grass. Well, it doesn't work. And then I do a bit of scanning and analysis and actually realize it's young kids, 2, 3-year-olds, can't read properly. They're wasting my time, aren't I? But they're always, unless it is bad parenting, their parents are usually with them or someone's with them. They're not just trapped in the park and left on their own. So if we could get them to read something and then impart that information to the little people, then maybe that would have an effect. So I found this on the internet. The internet is a wonderful thing. It's a bad thing as well, but it's a wonderful thing. Do not disturb tiny grasses dreaming. Okay. Subtle, targeted. There's no evidence base for this. This is just me logically working this out. The point is I'm making, if you're going to influence anybody, you need to know as much about them as you possibly can and not think there's a one size fits all prevention approach or whatever message that you can give. Yeah, lion lies Jason's second message of influence. And I came up, again, I said that COVID was responsible for a lot of bad things, and here's another one. I came up with an acronym about how to nudge it, okay? So nudges have to be subtle, so nuanced, they have to be unconscious, so it has to be tapping into system one thinking and not conscious kind of thought. Discerning, should be able to target those on the cusp of choosing the pro-social option. Give people a choice, easy. And this one that chief constables love, inexpensive. So not £30,000 worth of CCTV, maybe a leaflet or a couple of signs might do. Or, as in Manchester many years ago, I just said that this car park that was notoriously bad for having cars stolen from it and nicked, which is a problem that sorts itself out eventually because no one parks there, but gets displaced. All they needed to do was cut the hedge round that went around the car park down so that people walking past could be seen, and they would have saved themselves £30,000 worth of CCTV. Yeah, so it's about kind of inexpensive, but it's about targeting your nudges in the right way. Okay, and it needs to be testable as my nods to evidence-based policing. Yeah. This I did with some students. Anyone familiar with Leeds? Anyone familiar with Hyde Park in Leeds? You should be. It is the burglary capital of the universe. Okay, not of the world, the universe. Okay, every man, woman, and their dog has had a go at trying to reduce burglary in this area. Okay, it's a higher occupancy area for students living in houses with 5 rooms in. It's a multiple kind of occupancy area. Yeah. So I had a crack at this. But I took a different approach and I said, okay, tell me the 12 most burgled streets that you have in Hyde Park and we'll look at them. And we found that many of the burglaries were insecure, which sounds a bit of an oxymoron, but it's when people leave their windows and doors open. And as a student, I remembered I was in halls of residence. Oh God, those memories came back last night over there. Halls, not here though, halls of residence at a university that would accept my poor grades. But now look at me, wonderful. Halls of residence where everything's done for you, and probably mummy and daddy did the security at home. So when they go out into the big wide world at year 2, they just leave the windows open and everything else. Yeah. So the point of it was we wanted to find out information about them and how we could kind of get to them and get messages to them. But I thought, well, I'm not listening. I want to know more about the people that live on these 12 streets. So I designed a survey, and the police got some cadets to go and administer the survey. And they spoke to quite a lot of people on the 12 streets, obviously not everybody. But I did put a couple of nudges on the survey. And one was, do you know that you live on one of the 12 most burgled streets in Leeds? And the second one was, do you know that if it's an insecure burglary, your insurance company won't pay out? Yeah. And I thought, well, it might have some effects, whatever. But I really wanted the information more than anything else. But compared to 2 years before, the period when the survey was done, covering the similar period, which is not watertight evidence, but it's the best we had. There was a 25% reduction in the year that in the period that the survey was administered, and an 83% reduction compared to 2 years before. Okay, just for going out, it's old policing, isn't it? Going out and speaking to people. And it had an effect. And we came up with stuff like this, which is to do with kind of trying to tap into student psyche. And we printed this stuff off and kind of said, can you put it on the inside of your door so that when you're leaving, you remember? Flex it before you exit. I missed the boat, didn't I? If I had have done a flex it before you Brexit, we might not have been in this bloody mess. I like you to think about also around kind of crime prevention in particular, one-hit wonders. We do something, it doesn't work, it's not statistically significant, whatever your kind of criteria for success is, and then we move on, we bin it, yeah? Well, why? A lot of my slides refer to alcohol, I do apologise, but Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a very famous 12 steps to recovery process. It's not a one-step to recovery process. That would be give up drinking or you will die, which clearly doesn't work, yeah? But why don't we adopt that in crime prevention thinking? In that, okay, we may need to do a couple of things here in order to get people into a space where we can then nudge them to do the thing that we really want them to do, to make the decision, yeah? So maybe we do need to raise or minimize their external locus of control, yeah? So that we can then get them into a position where they will buy into whatever it is that we're doing, and we'll be in a bit better position. I called it nudge snooker, so I'm looking at how I can nudge people out of custody suite, actually, not figurative. I'm talking figurative, I'm not talking the real, into kind of beginning to think about why they're sitting there. Yeah, and that starts from the moment they come into the custody suite to the cell, and some writing on the walls, etc. But I'm going to be quick in that. Another important thing is affordance. Okay, this is I don't know if Jeff's here, but this is my homage to Jeff, who was moaning that nobody likes baseball over here. Well, of course we don't. It's not a proper game, is it? Yeah, but we do like baseball bats. We buy hundreds of thousands of baseball bats and about 3 baseballs in the UK. Because the baseball bat affords something else other than a baseball instrument. It's a weapon. Yeah. I did some research with. I go and talk to people. I want to try and work out how somebody thinks they make decisions, particularly offenders. I go and talk to them. Obvious stuff, isn't it? I was in Norwich prison before COVID broke out, and I was interviewing some prolific car thieves. And all right, 95% of the stuff they were telling me was probably a load of old rubbish, and they were trying to wind me up. But there's always one nugget of really good information that they gave me, and that was when I asked, "Okay, so you're still to order, even if I wanted a walnut dash in the car, I wanted this certain fawn leather, upholstery. Yeah, we can do that. We can do that." So what you drive around looking for these things. You have this Fagan-like network of kind of people that will. And they went, no, we go onto the Auto Trader website and we find it and then we go nick it. Now, I thought that was absolute genius. Yeah. So Auto Trader doesn't just afford the selling of cars, it affords opportunities to steal them as well. So affordance is important. What makes a crime opportunity is incredibly important. We need to understand it. Yeah. And quite often we need to talk to those that see them, realize them as opportunities. Priming as well. Okay. So Trans-Pennine Express, the worst railway system operator in the universe. Leeds is just, we've got the best and worst of everything. And actually, in fact, I think the government's taken it back now, the franchise. But it never ceased to amaze me. They were always late. The trains were always late, but they used to announce the train will be 10 minutes late. Okay. And the train used to turn up 8 minutes later. Happy days. Everyone's happy. Yeah. What they've done is they primed you. And then, of course, you don't complain because it was, it was 8 minutes late. You're happy that it was 2 minutes earlier than what they said. This is something I'm working on at the moment. Can you read that? I won't read it out. That is what the West Yorkshire Police, and in fact all police, witness and victim support services send out to people who are victims or are witnesses to crimes that will be called to court. Yeah. Well, I'm not kidding you, but my dentist sends me out more personal and warm reminders about appointments than that is to try and encourage someone to go through some traumatic episode again and come in and give it. It's no wonder that, I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it's no wonder that the attrition rate's quite high in terms of, particularly in domestic violence cases in court. So this is my version, which isn't radically different. It's just nicer. Yeah. It's priming them to what has to happen. I've just changed the words. Yeah. Made it more personable. Now, I'm not saying it's the panacea for all ills and that they're all going to sign up to being witnesses because that idiot's changed their form, but why? And do you know that the only explanation for why it is like that, okay, is because that's what it's always been like. And that's the biggest challenge in policing, is when you ask people why they do things in certain ways, they say it's what we've always done. Okay, I'm going to skip to the national decision-making model. All I will say about that is that doesn't tell you how to make decisions. That's just a process map. Yeah, it's good, but it doesn't tell you how to make decisions. Right, please for research in this area in police decision-making. There's not many of us that do it. And it's just as important as offender decision-making, yet the literature on offender decision-making, millions of hits, yeah? So there's the traditional stuff where we import kind of what's happened in the laboratory, Kahneman, Tversky bias type stuff into the real world of policing. Yeah. And there's the other one where people like me follow cops around. Sometimes I even ask, follow cops around and see how they make decisions in the real world. Okay. And this was one example. I followed some cops around a long while ago now. And they stopped some young lads and they had a conversation with them. I couldn't hear what they were saying. And then they let the lads go. And I said, what did you do? And they said, well, I asked them what their name and address was. So I said, okay, so did they give it to you? Well, yes. I said, well, I'm not being funny. And maybe they were telling the truth, but how do you know they were telling the truth? You didn't check anything. Yeah. So they sat with me for a couple of days, like some things do. And my wife will be testament to that. He's thinking about something again, and he's gone off on one. And it was around kind of addresses. How easy is it to come up with a false address on the spot? Yeah, so I asked a bunch of students to do exactly that. I said, the police have stopped you. You don't want to give them their real address. Give them a false address. And I want you to include a postcode. Okay. They did it. I gave them 15 seconds, which is a damn sight longer than you get. I think a police officer would even the most undiscerning would be suspicious after 15 seconds if you just looked at them and then came up with your postcode and your address. Yeah. And these are some of the reasons that they gave. Okay. Random. Well, if 666 Hell Lane's random, then yeah, that is random, and no police officer ever is gonna think that's fake, are they? But my favourite one was known other. So people were given other people's. Two women, it was two girls. It was the address of someone they hate. Which, if that's feelings reciprocated, as soon as the police knock on the door, that person goes, I know who did it because they bloody hate me. Yeah. But it was another way of kind of looking at it. But it was the time of the Da Vinci Code. I'm speaking in film, aren't I today? The Da Vinci Code. So we come up with the Da Vinci postcode. People are actually rubbish, and I'll use that term again. It's very technical, I know, at coming up with false postcodes. I went through the false postcodes that had been listed by my students, and almost 70% of them didn't exist. So if a police officer has access to or radios in a postcode and it doesn't exist, I'd be suspicious of that person, because if I didn't know my postcodes, I'd just say I don't know it. Why would I feel the compulsion to lie unless I was trying to hide something? So we're trying to push at the moment that happens, in the real world in policing. And I'm going to ace. This is another I've got to end on in a minute. Ace thief taking. Remember that phrase, 1970s? Those cops that could spot a bad one at 200 yards in a crowd of 2 million people. I exaggerate, yeah. I've interviewed 10 nominated ace thief takers from 4 different police forces, yeah, because I don't believe that they've got some God-given talent that nobody else has got. I think they might be relying on cues that other people aren't, or they've probably had a really good sergeant or someone who's passed on this information. Therein lies my biggest bone of contention with policing, is the brain drain when someone retires. They should be downloaded some mainframe computer, everything that they've ever experienced and know, and not left to go down the allotment. Anyway, so what I've found so far is the ones that I spoke to have excellent memories for faces, excellent memories for registration plates, so they have good memories, full stop. Yeah, They all stayed behind to read the latest intel reports before they went out. So they went out 5 or 10 minutes after the others on beat, on patrol. They were all PCs and sergeants. That many of them had done the job for 20 years. They're brilliant at it. You know, the public seem to think that if you're a PC at the end of your career, you showed a lack of ambition. Absolute rubbish. If you love what you're doing and you're brilliant at it, why not stay at that? They all used explainable cues as well, like look like the wrong person in the wrong place. But the most important thing was they were all prepared to be wrong. They'd stop someone and they could be wrong, and they'd be very polite and they'd send them on their way. Those at the police station never heard about the ones where they got it wrong. They only heard about the ones that they got it right. Hence the ace thief taking thing. Right, I'm not going to go through that because I'm going to be very quickly. Okay, Amazon, favorite rainforest. Yeah, anyone dispute that? Where's he going with this? Lovely rainforest. Okay, my book in the rainforest. My book on Amazon. I did this with some lawyers a little while ago, and I had no idea if it worked. But I thought, oh come on, I can't come and talk about influence, not come and try to influence you for my positive best, can I? And I'm going to end with some thank yous, and that is for being invited, and for you listening, but for this poster. In my mind, I have just played Saturday Night Pyramid Stage headline at Glastonbury. It doesn't get any better than that, does it? I don't know about Worthy Farm. I'll leave it for you to decide whether I was worthy to frequent that stage, but absolutely wonderful. And thank you very much for your attention.